That morning, I was just heading to my gate to pick up an Amazon package, but instead of a cardboard box, I saw a huge metal sign painted in red letters, Public Access Road Right. It was planted right in the middle of my 50-acre ranch gate. No permit from the government, no official paperwork, just the sloppy signature of a self-appointed HOA president. She thought that if she put up a big enough sign, my land would magically become the neighborhood's public park. What she didn't know was the real legal ownership of this road was about to blow up everything they'd built. Comment below if you've ever dealt with HOA madness, because this one, it ends with the whole town watching. 6 in the morning, and I'm standing at my gate with my coffee, staring at this metal monstrosity that definitely wasn't there yesterday. The text on the sign read, Public Access Road Right Willowbrook Authority. Now that's real interesting, I thought to myself. I pulled out my phone to check for any notifications from the county. Nothing. So I called the county clerk's office at 8 sharp. Sir, there's no road access filing for your property, the clerk told me. That's when I knew something fishy was going on. By 9 in the morning, here comes the HOA parade. Elaine Dempsey, the self-proclaimed queen of Willowbrook Estates, marching up to my gate with her little army. Ron Mitchell, the HOA treasurer, was carrying a clipboard like it was some kind of legal document. Behind them trailed Patty Ralston, the secretary, looking nervous as a cat in a dog kennel. Elaine had that look in her eyes that every man in America recognizes, the look of a woman who's decided she's in charge of something that ain't hers to control. Mr. Walker, Elaine announced, puffing up like a rooster, this road access is for community safety and emergency access. I took a slow sip of my coffee and looked her dead in the eye. Ma'am, I called the county this morning. There's no road access permit on record for my property. Ron jumped in, waving his fake papers around like a flag. The HOA has authority to create necessary he declared. I couldn't help but smile at that. Mind if I see the official documentation? I asked. Patty stammered something about it being processed through proper channels, but her voice cracked like a 13-year-old boy. After they left, I went inside and fired up my laptop to do some real research. What I found in the property records made my day a whole lot more interesting. The original survey from 1987 showed something that would change everything. Every single bit of road access from the Willowbrook development to Main Street went straight across my property. Not just the driveway they were fighting about, the entire access road that 47 families depended on every single day. Now that's real interesting, I said out loud to my empty living room. I spent the rest of the day studying those land ownership papers. Turns out, I didn't just have the right to refuse their fake road rights, I had complete control over their only way in and out. The water main ran under my land. Even some of the power lines crossed my property. These folks had built their whole development assuming they had rights they never actually got. The developer 15 years ago had cut corners and never filed the proper paperwork. Now they were all living on borrowed time, and they didn't even know it. That evening, I decided to install some security cameras around my property perimeter. Call it a hunch, but something told me Elaine wasn't the type to give up easy. Sure enough, at 11 at night, my brand new cameras caught something real interesting. There was Elaine, Ron, and Patty sneaking around my property with measuring tape and flashlights, plotting like a bunch of teenagers planning a prank. The audio pickup was crystal clear. If we can prove traffic safety issues, we can force community access, Elaine whispered. Ron's response made me laugh out loud. My hardware store can supply all the barriers for the project. Then Patty asked the million-dollar question. What if he fights back? Elaine's answer told me everything I needed to know about what kind of person I was dealing with. He's just one man, we're an entire community. Watching that security footage, I realized these folks had no idea what they'd just walked into. I'm a retired construction engineer who spent 20 years in the military before that. I know infrastructure, I know property law, and I sure as hell know how to plan a strategic response. Lady, you have no idea what you just walked into, I thought as I saved that footage to 3 different backup drives. I spent the rest of the night studying every inch of those property documents, and the more I read, the better this got. Not only did I control their road access, but I controlled their entire infrastructure lifeline. Every utility, every service, every way in and out of their precious neighborhood ran across land that belonged to me. They'd been trespassing for 15 years without even knowing. The next morning, I spotted Elaine and Ron returning with what looked like another fake notice. This time they had a county violation notice printed on some letterhead that looked about as official as a Chinese menu. But I was ready for round 2. 7 in the morning, and here comes Elaine marching up to my gate like she owns the place, waving around her latest masterpiece. Notice of civilization, the paper read, printed on letterhead that I'm pretty sure came from Ron's home printer. Property owner must remove obstructions to community road access within 48 hours or face $500 daily penalties. I had to hand it to her. The woman had creativity. Too bad she didn't have any legal authority to back it up. Interesting document, I told her, taking my sweet time to read every word. What's your authority to issue fines? Elaine straightened up like she was about to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. The HOA bylaws clearly state, she started, but I cut her off. Ma'am, your HOA bylaws don't override property law. But let me ask you something. Do you know who owns the road your entire community uses every day? The color started draining from her face, but she wasn't ready to back down yet. I walked over to my truck and pulled out the simple land ownership map I'd printed that morning. Spreading it across the hood of her car, I pointed to the highlighted section. See this road y'all use every day? According to official records, it sits entirely on my property. Elaine's face went white as fresh paint. That can't be right, she stammered. 15 years ago, your developer built this road without getting permission. Y'all been using my land without asking this whole time. That's when Elaine went into full panic mode. She knew she was losing control, and desperate people do desperate things. She spent the rest of the day going door to door with her fake emergency petition, telling everyone that I was threatening community safety. She even organized an emergency HOA meeting with the subject line, "Dealing with Hostile Neighbor." The woman was pulling out all the stops. 7 that evening, the Willowbrook Community Center was packed with about 40 residents who'd bought into Elaine's story hook, line, and sinker. Elaine had prepared a whole slideshow with fake safety concerns and photos that made my ranch look like some kind of fortress of doom. Ron was backing her up with claims about how much money they'd invested in road maintenance, though I noticed he couldn't produce any actual receipts. Patty was handing out flyers with anonymous complaints that sounded suspiciously like they all came from the same person. The energy in that room was electric, and not in a good way. I could see people clustered in little groups, whispering and pointing toward where they figured I might sit. A young couple near the front were holding hands so tight their knuckles were white. An older man was recording everything on his phone, muttering about evidence for court. In the back corner, a mother with tired eyes was bouncing a crying baby, probably stressed about missing work because of my blockade. The whole scene felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. That's when I decided to crash their little party. I walked into that community center with my folder full of documents, and you could hear a pin drop. "Evening, folks," I said, nice and calm. "I understand y'all are discussing my property. Mind if I share some facts?" The room went dead silent. I opened up my simple ownership papers and spread them on the table where everyone could see. This road, the only way for 47 houses to reach Main Street, crosses my property without any official permission. The murmurs started immediately, but now I could see the different reactions playing out across the room. The young couple I'd noticed earlier looked at each other with growing understanding. An elderly woman near the window put her hand to her chest and whispered, "Oh my goodness," loud enough for half the room to hear. A middle-aged man in a work shirt stood up and said, "Wait a minute, are you telling us we don't actually have rights to this road?" I nodded. That's exactly what I'm telling you." Then something beautiful happened. A young mother standing by the door, eyes red with exhaustion from dealing with this whole mess, spoke up in a voice that carried across the silent room. "So, we've really been living on your land all these years?" The honesty in her question cut through all of Elaine's manipulation like a knife. "Ma'am," I told her gently, "you've been using my land without permission for 15 years. The developer never filed the proper paperwork." The room erupted in confused voices as people started connecting the dots. Eleanor Hayes, a retired teacher who'd been living there longer than anyone, stood up with the authority that only comes from years of managing rowdy classrooms. "Elaine, is this true? Do we have legal road access rights?" Elaine started stammering about how the developer had assured them everything was legal. "Assured isn't the same as filed paperwork," Eleanor shot back, and I could see heads nodding around the room. That's when the community really started splitting. The younger residents were questioning Elaine's claims, demanding to see documentation that didn't exist. The older folks were getting angry about being lied to for years. A man in his 60s stood up and pointed at Ron. "You told us our HOA fees were paying for road maintenance. Where's that money been going?" Ron tried to deflect by claiming I was just trying to intimidate everyone, but his voice didn't carry the same confidence it had that morning. I watched one particularly telling moment unfold near the back of the room. A woman who had been nodding along with Elaine's presentation suddenly stopped mid-nod when she saw my ownership papers. She turned to her husband and said loud enough for others to hear, "Honey, remember when we moved in? The realtor never showed us any road easement documents." Her husband's face changed as he realized what that meant. "We just assumed," he said, and I could see the same realization spreading across other faces in the room. Patty had completely backed away from the microphone and was trying to blend into the wall. A few residents were already standing up to leave, clearly wanting no part of whatever legal mess this was turning into. But others were leaning forward, wanting to understand exactly what their rights were and what this meant for their property values. I decided to offer them an olive branch, partly because I'm not a complete monster, and partly because I wanted to see how far Elaine would push this. "Folks, I didn't ask for this situation, but now that we're here, we need proper legal documentation. I'm willing to work with you, but that fake road sign comes down tonight." Most of the room seemed relieved to hear a reasonable solution, but not Elaine. After the meeting, she cornered me in the parking lot. "Name your price, what do you want?" she demanded. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "I want honest neighbors, ma'am, not ones who plant fake signs in the dark." As people filed out of that community center, I could see the divisions that had formed. About half the residents looked relieved that there might be a path forward. The other half looked angry and confused, not sure who to blame for this mess. Eleanor was already organizing a small group of people who wanted to discuss reasonable solutions, but Elaine was gathering her own supporters, the ones who still believed this was somehow my fault for not just rolling over and letting them take my land. Driving home that night, I thought this might actually end peacefully. Boy, was I wrong. At 2 a.m, my security cameras caught Elaine and Ron back on my property, this time with bolt cutters and a second fake sign reading "Emergency Access Route." They were trying to install it deeper on my land, thinking they could create some kind of backup story about emergency vehicle access. But what they didn't know was that Eleanor Hayes had insomnia and was watching the whole thing from her bedroom window, recording everything on her phone. The battle lines were drawn, and tomorrow was going to get a whole lot more interesting. 5 a.m, and the professional fence crew was pulling up to my gate. I'd called them the night before and paid extra for emergency service. 4 hours later, they'd installed a heavy-duty barrier that completely cut off the road entrance. The new sign read, "Personal property, no road access, right, authorized personal only." I also had them install an intercom system because I figured there'd be some interesting conversations coming my way. At 6:30 sharp, Mr. Johnson from house number 12 came driving up for his morning commute to work. When he hit that barrier, you could see the confusion on his face clear as day. The intercom crackled to life with my pre-recorded message. "Good morning. This is Cole Walker. You're attempting to cross private property without permission. If you need to discuss road access rights, please contact your HOA representatives. Have a blessed day." The poor man sat there for a full minute trying to process what was happening. By 7 o'clock, it was chaos. 47 households, all trying to leave for work and school, and suddenly discovering they were completely trapped. The school bus was honking outside the barrier, kids in uniform standing around with their backpacks, parents frantically calling their bosses to explain why they'd be late. Amazon delivery trucks were circling the development like vultures, drivers scratching their heads and calling dispatch. One Uber Eats driver was so confused he started taking pictures to post online, which honestly made my day. The visual was something else, and I'll admit, watching it unfold made me feel conflicted in ways I hadn't expected. Cars backed up inside the development like a parking lot, kids missing the school bus, parents realizing they couldn't get to work. But then I noticed the individual stories that really got to me. There was an elderly man, probably in his 70s, who'd gotten dressed for what looked like a doctor's appointment. He slowly walked up to his car, opened the door, then just stood there for a long moment before closing it again and walking back to his house. The defeat in his shoulders hit me harder than I'd expected. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, was tugging on her mother's hand and asking in that loud way kids do, "Mommy, why doesn't that man want us to go to school?" Her mother knelt down and whispered something, but I could see the stress on her face as she tried to explain a situation she didn't fully understand herself. The mother kept glancing toward my ranch with a mixture of confusion and fear, like she was trying to figure out if I was some kind of monster. Around 8 a.m, here comes Elaine, storming up to the barrier like a bull seeing red. She started pounding on the metal with her fist, screaming, "Open this road immediately!" The intercom crackled back to life. "Ma'am, if you have official paperwork proving road access rights, please slide it through the mail slot." That's when she really lost it. "I'll sue you for everything," she screamed. My voice came back calm as Sunday morning. "Looking forward to seeing your documentation, ma'am." But then something happened that I didn't expect. Around 9:30, I saw an elderly woman walking slowly toward the barrier, carrying what looked like a plate covered with a kitchen towel. Mrs. Patterson from house number 7. I'd seen her working in her garden, but never spoken to her. She stood about 10 feet from the intercom and called out in a voice that carried surprising strength for her age. "Mr. Walker, this is Dorothy Patterson. I brought you some cookies." The intercom crackled as I responded. "That's very kind of you, ma'am. May I ask why?" Her answer stopped me cold. "Because I don't agree with what they did to you. That sign was wrong, and lying to neighbors is wrong too." I walked out to meet her personally, something I hadn't done for anyone else. She handed me a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies that were still warm. "I've lived here for 12 years, she told me quietly. "I always wondered why we never had proper paperwork for this road. When Elaine started pushing for that sign, I asked to see the legal documents. She told me to mind my own business." Mrs. Patterson looked back toward the trap development, then back at me. "Sometimes doing the right thing feels awful, but it's still right." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, because she was putting into words exactly what I was feeling. By 9 o'clock, Deputy Don Carter pulled up in his patrol car. Don and I went way back to our Army days, and I'd given him a heads up about what was coming. The crowd surrounded his car, expecting him to save the day, but Don had done his homework. "Folks, I've checked the ownership records. Mr. Walker has legal right to control access to his land." Elaine jumped in immediately. "But we've used this road for 15 years!" Dawn looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "Using someone's land without permission for 15 years doesn't make it yours, ma'am." The local news crew showed up around noon, and suddenly everyone wanted to be interviewed. The reporter, Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7, was asking all the right questions. "Have you verified the road access rights for this roadway?" she asked the trapped residents. You could see the wheels turning in their heads as they realized they'd never actually checked. We assumed was about all most of them could manage. But what struck me was watching the different reactions as the truth sank in. Some people looked angry, at Elaine, at the developer, at themselves for not asking questions 15 years ago. Others just looked tired and sad. What really got interesting was watching the community split apart in real time. Eleanor Hayes started organizing a group of residents who wanted to hear my side of the story. "Maybe we should find out what Mr. Walker's terms are instead of fighting," she suggested. But Ron was having none of it. "This will destroy our property values," he kept shouting. Patty was flip-flopping like a fish on dry land, 1 minute supporting Elaine, the next minute suggesting they should apologize and work something out. A young father with a toddler in his arms approached the barrier and called through the intercom. "Mr. Walker, my wife's in the hospital. She's supposed to come home tomorrow and the ambulance can't get through. Is there any way?" His voice broke and I felt like the worst person in the world. "Sir, emergency vehicles have my phone number. I'll open the gate for medical emergencies." The relief on his face was immediate, but the guilt I felt was overwhelming. Around 2 in the afternoon, I watched Elaine try something that told me everything I needed to know about her character. She went back to her house and came out with industrial bolt cutters, planning to cut through my barrier in broad daylight. Eleanor saw her from across the street and started shouting, "Elaine, stop! You're destroying property!" But Elaine was past the point of listening to reason. "This is my community's road," she screamed back. "It's his land. The surveys prove it," Eleanor shouted, but Elaine was already attacking the barrier with those cutters. What Elaine didn't know was that Eleanor had started recording the whole thing with her phone. High-definition video of the HOA president destroying private property while screaming about community rights. It was exactly the kind of evidence that would make my case airtight if this ever went to court. But watching it happen, seeing a woman completely lose control in front of her neighbors, I felt more sad than vindicated. That evening, the local news ran the story as their lead segment. "Ranch owner legally blocks development after HOA installs fake road sign" was the headline. They interviewed me right there at the barrier, and I kept it simple. I didn't create this situation. I'm simply exercising property rights that have been ignored for 15 years. When the reporter asked what it would take to resolve things, I looked directly into the camera. "Remove the fake signs, acknowledge they've been using my land without permission, and then we'll talk about legal road access." By the end of day 2, cracks were showing in Elaine's support. Some residents were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about how this whole mess started. Others were demanding to see the original development paperwork that supposedly gave them road rights. Mrs. Patterson had become something of a folk hero among the reasonable faction, openly stating that the community owed me an apology. But Elaine wasn't ready to give up. That night at 11, my cameras caught her making one final attempt to cut through the barrier. But this time Eleanor was watching from her bedroom window and recording everything. The evidence was mounting, and tomorrow I was going to show everyone exactly what kind of leaders they'd been trusting with their neighborhood. Day 2 of the blockade, and Channel 7 News was running follow-up coverage that had the whole county talking. The headline read, "Ranch owner blocks development over fake road sign," and suddenly my phone was ringing off the hook. Half the calls were from neighbors supporting my property rights, and the other half were from angry residents trapped inside the development. I was starting to feel a little guilty about the innocent families caught in the middle, especially the kids missing school, but I was determined to see this through to the end. That morning, Elaine tried her most desperate move yet. She'd hired her unemployed brother-in-law Gary to pretend he was some kind of government official. He showed up at my barrier with fake letterhead, claiming to represent the County Emergency Access Authority. "Mr. Walker," Gary announced, reading from what was obviously a script, "you must open this road for public safety." I looked him up and down, noting his wrinkled shirt and nervous fidgeting. "Sir, what government agency are you representing exactly?" Gary started fumbling with his papers. "The, County Emergency Access Authority," he repeated. "There's no such agency," I told him calmly. "Are you impersonating a government official?" Don Carter had run a background check on Gary that morning and called me with the results. "Cold, this guy has 3 outstanding warrants and no legal authority whatsoever. If he keeps this up, I'll have to arrest him for impersonation." That's when I decided it was time to show everyone exactly what kind of people they'd been trusting with their neighborhood leadership. I set up my laptop and projector outside the barrier for all the gathered residents and the local news crew to see. About 50 people had gathered, including some folks from neighboring developments who'd heard about the drama. "Since there seems to be confusion about what really happened here," I announced, "let's clear things up with some evidence." The crowd fell silent as I started playing the security footage on a big screen for everyone to see. Video number 1, crystal clear footage of Elaine, Ron, and Patty planting the fake road sign at 11 at night, complete with audio of their conversation about forcing community access. You could hear the gasps from the crowd as they realized their HOA leadership had been lying to them from day 1. Video number 2, Eleanor's phone footage of Elaine attacking my barrier with bolt cutters while screaming about community rights. Video number 3, Gary's pathetic attempt to impersonate a county official, complete with his nervous stammering and fake credentials. The crowd's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. "Elaine, you lied to all of us," Eleanor shouted from the front row. A younger resident called out, "You told us the county approved this." Another voice from the back added, "We trusted you with our neighborhood." I watched Elaine's face cycle through anger, embarrassment, and finally something that looked like panic as she realized her whole scheme was falling apart in front of 50 witnesses and a news camera. That's when the HOA leadership completely collapsed. Patty broke first, stepping up to my improvised microphone. "I just did what Elaine told me. I didn't know it was illegal," she announced to the crowd. Ron tried to salvage something by claiming the hardware supplies were legitimate business. But Eleanor shut him down immediately. "Ron, you helped falsify HOA records to pay for illegal activities." The crowd was turning ugly, and I could see why. These people had trusted their neighbors to look out for the community, and instead they'd gotten lies and schemes. Under pressure from the angry crowd, Patty resigned as secretary on the spot. Ron stepped down as treasurer rather than face more questions about the HOA budget. That left Elaine standing alone, defiant to the end. "I was protecting this community," she shouted over the angry voices. "Cole Walker is destroying our neighborhood." But Eleanor, who'd emerged as the voice of reason, wasn't having any of it. "No, Elaine, you destroyed our neighborhood by lying to us." The residents called an emergency HOA election right there in front of my barrier. The results were swift and decisive. Elaine was removed as president by a vote of 43-4. Eleanor was elected interim president, with unanimous support from everyone except Elaine's few remaining loyalists. The new board immediately voted to formally apologize to me and began discussing how to fix the mess their previous leadership had created. The media was eating this up. Reporter Jennifer Walsh was interviewing anyone who'd talk, and the questions were getting pointed. "Mr. Walker, will you press charges against the former HOA leadership?" she asked me. I'd been thinking about that all morning. "That depends on whether the community wants to resolve this honorably or keep fighting," I told her. When she asked what an honorable resolution would look like, I kept it simple. Remove the fake signs, acknowledge they've been using my land without permission, and then we'll talk about legal road access. But Elaine wasn't done yet. That evening, she tried rallying support from neighboring HOA developments, thinking she could build some kind of coalition against me. It backfired spectacularly when those HOA presidents researched the story and realized she'd committed fraud. "Elaine, you made us all look bad," one of them told her. "Handle your own mess." I decided it was time to make my position clear to everyone. "Tomorrow morning, I'll present my terms for resolving this situation," I announced to the crowd and the news cameras. "Y'all can accept them or get comfortable being stuck inside." The message was simple: work with me honestly or stay trapped. That night, Elaine made one final desperate move. She called the same TV station claiming I was terrorizing families with children and demanding they investigate me for holding people hostage. But Eleanor had the same idea. She called the same reporter with her own story about Elaine's lies and the evidence we'd gathered. By morning, it was clear which version the media found more credible. The truth was finally coming out, and Elaine was about to face the consequences of her choices. Channel 5 News arrived bright and early for what they thought would be Elaine's exclusive interview about being terrorized by a crazy rancher. Instead, they got front row seats to the most spectacular public meltdown I've ever witnessed. Elaine showed up looking like she hadn't slept in days, wearing wrinkled clothes and with that wild look in her eyes that screams unhinged. The reporter, Sarah Kim, was expecting a sympathetic victim story, but what she got was pure television gold. "Mr. Walker is a domestic terrorist," Elaine declared into the camera, her voice cracking with emotion. "He's holding 47 families hostage because he hates communities." Sarah Kim, being a professional, tried to steer the interview toward facts. "Ms. Dempsey, do you have documentation proving road access rights?" she asked. Elaine's response told everyone exactly how far off the deep end she'd gone. "We shouldn't need documentation. We've used that road for years." When Sarah pressed about property rights, Elaine completely lost it. Property rights are just excuses for selfish people to hurt communities. During the live broadcast, Sarah's producer was fact-checking in real time. "Ms. Dempsey," Sarah interrupted, "we've just confirmed there's no recorded road access permit for this roadway. Are you saying the community never verified legal access?" That's when Elaine completely broke down on live television. Tears streaming down her face, she started babbling about how unfair everything was. "I just wanted to improve things. I just wanted people to respect me. After my divorce, this community was all I had. The whole county was watching a woman have a complete mental breakdown because someone finally told her no." The reaction on social media was swift and brutal. Comments were flooding in, calling her everything from unhinged to the Karen of the century. People were sharing clips of her crying and screaming, and not in a sympathetic way. "This woman needs help, not a HOA presidency," was one of the kinder comments. Others were less charitable, but the most telling response was from local residents. "Cole Walker is a saint for not pressing charges." Channel 7 interviewed me immediately after Elaine's meltdown, and I tried to take the high road. "I feel sorry for her situation," I told the reporter honestly, "but personal problems don't justify falsifying legal documents and trespassing on private property." The contrast between my calm, reasonable responses and Elaine's emotional breakdown was stark. Public opinion polls from the local station showed 87% support for my property rights, 73% believing the HOA had overstepped, and 91% wanting legal road access established properly. At 10 in the morning, I held my promised meeting at the community center. About 60 residents showed up, which was most of the development. I'd spent the morning preparing my terms, and I thought they were more than fair considering the circumstances. The room was packed, but the energy was completely different from that first contentious meeting. People looked tired, resigned, and ready to hear solutions instead of arguments. "Here's what needs to happen," I announced to the room, pulling out a simple list I'd written by hand. "First, the community needs to formally admit no road access rights exist. Second, we file proper documentation with the county for $2,000. Third, we upgrade the road to county standards for $15,000. Fourth, we establish an annual maintenance fee structure. Fifth, new HOA leadership that prevents future problems." The room was silent as people absorbed what I was saying, but I could see them doing mental math. Eleanor, now serving as interim president, stood up immediately. "These terms are more than fair," she announced to the room. The residents broke into applause, finally seeing a way out of this mess. But then I heard something that really drove home how this whole experience had changed people. A man in his 40s, someone I recognized as one of Elaine's early supporters, stood up and said, $350. That's still cheaper than hiring a lawyer to fight this. There were nods around the room as people realized the financial reality of their situation. An elderly woman near the back raised her hand tentatively. "Mr. Walker, I need to say something." The room turned to look at her, and I recognized her as someone who'd been at that first hostile meeting. I voted for Elaine as HOA president 2 years ago. I thought she was strong and would protect our neighborhood. Her voice was shaking slightly. "I'm ashamed that I didn't ask the right questions. I'm ashamed that we put our trust in someone who lied to us." The silence that followed was profound, and I could see other heads nodding in agreement. But Ron tried one last objection about the costs. "But the expenses," he started, only to be shut down by angry voices from the crowd. "Shut up, Ron, you caused this," someone shouted from the back. A younger woman stood up and pointed directly at him. "You were treasurer, Ron. Where's the money we paid for road maintenance all these years?" Ron's face went red as he realized his financial manipulation was about to be exposed. That's when Elaine made her final stand. She burst into the meeting like a woman possessed, shouting over everyone. "I'll never agree to this. I'll fight in court." Eleanor stood up to face her former president. "Elaine, you're no longer HOA president. The community has voted." But Elaine wasn't hearing it. "This is my neighborhood. I built this community," she screamed. Eleanor's response was quiet but devastating. "No, you nearly destroyed it." Before anyone could respond, I decided to address something that had been weighing on me since this whole thing started. I stood up and looked around the room at all these people whose lives had been disrupted by their leaders' lies. "Folks, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about fake signs or property rights. This is about what holds a community together." The room went silent. Respect for the law isn't some abstract concept. It's what keeps neighbors from taking advantage of each other. It's what lets kids walk to school safely and lets elderly folks sleep peacefully at night. When your leaders ignore the law, they're not just breaking rules, they're breaking the trust that makes community possible. Don Carter chose that moment to serve Elaine with official citations for trespassing, destruction of property, impersonating government authority, and filing false documents. "Ma'am," he told her calmly, "you can accept the community resolution or face criminal charges." The room went dead silent as everyone realized how serious this had become. The financial reality was harsh but manageable. Eleanor, now officially recognized as the interim HOA president, laid out the numbers for everyone. "We need $17,000 total. That's about $350 per household to fix this mess." A middle-aged man near the front did the calculation out loud. $350? That's less than most of us spend on cable TV in a year. There was grumbling, but most residents seemed relieved to finally have a clear path forward. "Better than being stuck forever," one of them muttered, and heads nodded around the room. What really sealed Elaine's fate was the financial pressure on her neighbors. When residents realized they'd each have to pay hundreds of dollars to fix her mistakes, the last of her support evaporated. Former friends started crossing the street to avoid her. Even her closest allies on the old HOA board publicly distanced themselves to avoid association with the scandal. I decided to throw them one small bone. "If Elaine publicly apologizes and resigns from all HOA activities," I told Eleanor privately, "I'll reduce the settlement amount by $5,000. Eleanor brought this offer to the community, and they voted overwhelmingly, 89%, to accept my terms and pressure Elaine to take the deal. As the community meeting wrapped up and residents headed home to discuss the financial assessments with their families, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not for revenge or victory, but for the possibility that this whole mess might actually make the neighborhood stronger in the long run. The question was whether Elaine's pride would let her do the right thing, or if she'd drag everyone down with her one last time. The next morning brought the most satisfying moment of this entire ordeal. After a sleepless night and pressure from the few friends she had left, Elaine appeared at an emergency community meeting looking like a broken woman. Standing at the front of the room with about 60 residents staring at her, she pulled out a handwritten statement with shaking hands. "I formally apologize to Cole Walker and this community," she read in a voice barely above a whisper. "I exceeded my authority and created this crisis through poor judgment." The silence in that room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop as everyone processed the sight of their former dictator admitting defeat. "I resigned from all HOA positions effective immediately and will comply with any legal resolutions," she continued, her voice breaking on every other word. When she finished reading, the room erupted in applause, not for her, but for the end of their nightmare. Eleanor stood up immediately. "Motion to accept Mr. Walker's terms and begin proper road access filing," she announced. The vote was unanimous approval, with only Elaine abstaining by walking out of the room. I arrived at the barrier with the key to the electronic lock, and there must have been 200 people gathered to watch. Local media was there for the symbolic reopening, and I could see the relief on faces throughout the crowd. "This barrier stays open permanently once we have proper legal documentation," I announced to the assembled crowd. "Today, we start doing things the right way." The click of that lock opening was the sweetest sound I'd heard in weeks. The cheer that went up from 200 voices was something I'll never forget. The first cars to exit were emotional moments that really drove home what this had meant to people's daily lives. A young mother rushed out to get baby formula she'd been unable to buy for 3 days. A teenager finally drove to the job interview he'd missed. An elderly man headed straight to his doctor's appointment that had been postponed twice. Watching people reclaim their freedom to come and go made me realize this had been about more than just property rights. It had been about basic human dignity. Within 48 hours, the wheels of justice and bureaucracy were turning. A professional surveyor arrived to officially map the road access boundaries. The county clerk processed our paperwork in record time. Construction crews started upgrading the road to proper standards with adequate drainage and signage. The whole neighborhood was buzzing with activity as people finally saw their tax dollars working for them instead of against them. The transformation of Willowbrook Estates was remarkable to watch. In the first week, legal road access was filed with the county. By the second week, the road was completely repaved with proper drainage that would prevent flooding during heavy rains. The third week brought new signage that made me smile every time I saw it. Willowbrook Estates Community Access Road, courtesy of Cole Walker. The residents had insisted on that last part despite my protests. Elaine's exile was swift and quiet. A for sale sign appeared in her yard within days of her public apology. The moving truck arrived on a Saturday morning, and I noticed that none of her former neighbors came out to help load boxes or say goodbye. Eleanor, being the kind person she was, did stop by to wish Elaine well. "Despite everything, I hope you find peace somewhere else," she told her. Elaine's response surprised me. "Thank you. I learned something here. Maybe I can be better somewhere else." The community voted me honorary Willowbrook resident despite my living outside the development, which touched me more than I'd expected. "Y'all are welcome to use my pasture for community events," I told them, "long as you clean up after yourselves." That gesture opened the door to something I hadn't expected: genuine friendship with my neighbors. Eleanor's leadership transformed the HOA into something completely different from what it had been under Elaine. Monthly transparency meetings replaced secretive board decisions. All major choices required community votes instead of executive orders. Most importantly, new bylaws specifically prohibited any authority to alter property boundaries or make claims on land outside the development. Annual audits of HOA finances would prevent the kind of creative bookkeeping that had funded Elaine's schemes. 6 months later, a follow-up news story showed just how completely things had changed. Property values had increased 12% due to improved infrastructure and community stability. The HOA had received 0 complaints since Eleanor took over. I had started a consulting business helping other communities resolve property rights disputes. Most surprisingly, Willowbrook had become a model for HOA accountability that other neighborhoods were trying to copy. Don Carter summed it up best when he stopped by for coffee one evening. "Cole, you handled this better than most law enforcement could have. You got justice without destroying anyone." I thought about that for a while before responding. Sometimes the best way to win is helping your enemy become a better person. And speaking of becoming better people, I'd heard through the grapevine that Elaine was volunteering at a literacy program in her new town. Maybe getting humbled was exactly what she needed. The new traditions that emerged made the whole ordeal worthwhile. We started an annual Property Rights Day barbecue at my ranch that brought the whole community together. Eleanor organized a community garden on part of my land where families could grow vegetables together. During the holidays, we strung lights along the new road that could be seen for miles. Even Ron and Patty found their way back into the community's good graces. Ron's hardware store became the official supplier for all community maintenance, and he threw himself into the work of rebuilding trust. Patty volunteered as HOA secretary under Eleanor's careful supervision, and she turned out to be quite competent when she wasn't taking orders from a wannabe dictator. The ultimate validation came when the Texas Property Rights Association named me Citizen of the Year for defending property rights, with wisdom, patience, and ultimately mercy. The award citation meant more to me than any military decoration I'd ever received. As I sit on my porch these days, watching children play in my pasture while their parents chat nearby, I think about how this all started with one fake sign and one woman's need to control something that wasn't hers. Don often stops by for coffee, and last week he asked if I had any regrets about how everything went down. Just one, I told him, watching the evening traffic flow smoothly along our properly documented road. I should have installed those security cameras years ago. The footage of a lane in that cactus garden still makes me laugh. The perfect ending to this story isn't revenge or destruction, it's the sight of neighbors working together, respecting each other's rights and building something better than what came before.